now move on to Dr. Matthew McCartney, who is director of the South Asia program at the Oxford University, and also a professor in political economy and human development of India. Dr. McCartney, your floor.
Thank you. So big thanks to Jonathan and I think Anne for organising this, and thanks as well to Dushan and Junaid from EFSAS for the invite here. Okay, that's my details and the title. My email is there, so please do, if anybody's got any kind of queries, questions, do follow up with me. So I'm going to start off with pointing out that there's perhaps the excitement about CPEC really masks the fact that this is in a context of a very long-term relationship with China. I'm going to talk about, because I'm in the middle of researching CPEC at the moment. I'm on a year's sabbatical from my university, so I'm going to point out some of my thoughts here are quite preliminary. I'm not going to dwell on, but I've got a couple of points to make about the specific problems of researching CPEC, and then I'm going to take up this delightfully provocative title of the workshop today, is this a new East India company? And look at, I'm going to question, I'm not going to dwell too much on the nature of the East India company, but I'm going to look at, is CPEC going to have a big effect? Is it going to have a durable effect? Or as Junaid made, is it going to have a game-changing effect? Is it going to be a transformative effect, whether for good or bad? I'm going to look at three specific aspects here: the complementarity between China and Pakistan. I'm going to look, evaluate, and I'm going to look at whether this is going to bring prosperity or other effects. Okay, I'm going to dash through this quite quickly. This is one map I've culled from the internet looking, this is the One Belt, One Road. So China's transport infrastructure links with the rest of the world. Quite confusingly, which is the belt and which is the road. One of those is a land link, one is a maritime link. This is the CPEC network of transport, road, railway and energy links linking up from Kashgar in the west of China down to deep water port in Gwadar in Balochistan, that's in the southwest of Pakistan. Okay, so nothing new. Just a kind of thoughts to start off with. CPEC is obviously a lot in the news, particularly so if one reads Pakistani newspapers or one goes to economics conferences in Pakistan, where one can often hear of little else. However, Pakistan and China have long links. Pakistan was one of the first countries to recognize communist China in 1950. Pakistan was instrumental in helping secure China access to the UN in the 1970s. China and Pakistan signed a long-term trade agreement in 1963. So the free trade agreement in 2006 was rather a culmination of that long link. China was instrumental in building the Karakoram Highway, that's the transport link in the very far north of Pakistan in the 1960s. So it's this very longevity of the relationship between China and Pakistan that gives us perhaps some grounds for optimism, or gives us a specific context in which to think about the likely impact of CPEC. So whereas the US have given Pakistan a lot of aid, Pakistan aid has blown hot and cold. Pakistan has got a lot of aid when it's been in the US's interests to do so, whereas China has given aid, continued to give aid, continued to maintain a relationship with Pakistan throughout now a very long period of time. So just a few thoughts on the particular focuses of my research and focus of this brief presentation. So CPEC is a package of about, the number goes up every time I read the newspapers, but it's about $50–60 billion of investment in energy and infrastructure in Pakistan. My particular focus is the infrastructure. This constitutes about 25% of CPEC investment, specifically the economic impact of that investment, so on employment, on industry, on GDP, on industrialization. Now, energy investments constitute about 70% of CPEC investment. I think the research is more clearly established that those energy investments are going to have a positive impact on Pakistan. And anybody who spent time in Pakistan over the last 10 years or so would have been apparent the energy crisis in Pakistan. One could sit in a very wealthy part of Lahore or Karachi and experience energy shortages, power cuts for 10, 15 hours a day. Private firms have coped with this by installing very high-cost private generators that have raised costs of production. Those energy generators have boosted, increased Pakistan's dependence on imported oil. And the lack of electricity in that 40, 50 degrees heat in the summer is a very debilitating condition, although that tends to be worse for those who have electricity and air conditioning rather than the poorest who've never had air conditioning to start with. So I'm focusing on the infrastructure rather than the energy, but acknowledging that the energy is very important. I'm not particularly focusing on, my background is on economics, I'm not particularly focusing on international relations, and many scholars would say that is the most important aspect of CPEC. The fact that CPEC, many scholars argue, it's not really about economics, it's about the ability to import oil through Pakistan directly from the Middle East through pipelines, rather than oil having to go around India through the Malacca Strait to China. It reduces the US's potential naval influence over China quite considerably. Others have pointed out that the construction of that deep water port Gwadar in southwest Pakistan is the real importance of CPEC, that it gives potentially China a deep water port on the other side of India and right next to the Middle East. I'm not particularly going to focus either on livelihoods. The building of big construction projects can have a huge impact on livelihoods. This can be positive, such as generating employment in construction or generating employment in the industries or perhaps the port in Gwadar that spring up as a result of that construction. And it's very interesting, research from India on these type of big infrastructure projects shows that typically those who lose their livelihoods are not the same people as those who gain jobs in those new construction. And CPEC is likely in Pakistan to have quite a significant gender impact. A lot of those engaged in small-scale industry or subsistence agriculture are likely to be women, and a lot of those who are likely to get jobs in manufacturing after the construction of CPEC are likely to be migrant men. So whereas a lot of the literature or a lot of the government rhetoric from China talks about win-win situation, CPEC and the Silk Road being a win-win, that may be applicable at the level of China and Pakistan overall, but at more micro levels there are likely to be significant distributional impacts of CPEC. That's not something I'm particularly engaged with in my research, which is more narrowly focused on the economics. So there are significant problems with researching CPEC. I mean, one of the most striking is that CPEC is not due for completion until 2030. In Pakistan, experience of infrastructure and investment in Pakistan, we know it tends to overrun, so CPEC is likely to go well past 2030. A number of projects have been completed so far, but mainly in the energy sector. And we know from Pakistan's history that they tend to be very bad at managing donor-funded infrastructure projects. IMF programs, for example, Pakistan has failed to complete. I can't remember how many there are, maybe about 15 of them. Pakistan has failed to complete all but one IMF programs. But again, China claims to be different. China's relationships with Pakistan, China is an all-weather friend. China has persisted in its relationships, it's persisted with its assistance to Pakistan. China claims to be different. It claims it's not going to blow hot and cold, as has been the US experience of China, that it has a long-term commitment. China claims to be much more consultative in its relationships with Pakistan and other Silk-based countries, and has criticised the IMF for imposing conditions and policies on Pakistan. So perhaps, although Pakistan does have a bad record of engaging with donor-funded infrastructure, perhaps, and this is something the Chinese government explicitly claim, China is different. This is, one must not presume big infrastructure has a positive impact. This is a snapshot in this slide of Shanghai in 1990 and a skyline, the same skyline, Shanghai in 2015. In 1990, Pakistan spoke with the World Bank about building a metro system in Shanghai. The World Bank was very sceptical about this metro system. The World Bank pointed out that there's no demand for a metro. Most people in Shanghai ride bicycles, so perhaps the government of Shanghai should focus on improving bicycles. Shanghai went ahead, built the metro, opened a few years later. By present date, according to some estimates, this is now the biggest metro system in the world. The Shanghai metro system drove the transformation of Shanghai, turned it into this incredibly densely populated and successful metropolitan area in China. So this is a clear case of infrastructure promoting, leading transformative economic growth and development. This is another example of another infrastructure project, successful in some ways. It brought a lot of favourable publicity. This is the Greek Olympics in 2004, a lot of favourable publicity to Greece. It was a widely admired Olympics. A lot of the successes of that Olympic Games were drawn upon as lessons for the later Olympics in London and Beijing. However, the cost of that Olympics contributed to a rapid build-up of debt in Greece and was one of the contributory factors to the ongoing debt crisis in Greece. So this was an example of big infrastructure that drove a debt crisis rather than wider economic growth. So this is a claim made by the government of Pakistan. This is a government of Pakistan report from 2017. They say the CPEC as a growth axis and development belt, complementary advantages, mutual benefits and common prosperity. So these are the claims I'm going to look at in this little presentation. Based on the evidence we have so far and our understanding of Pakistan, are these claims likely to be borne out in reality? Now, here's a map of China. If you see Taiwan off the coast of China there, I'm first going to look at complementarity. Are there complementary economic relations between China and Japan? Now, when China was opening up in the 1980s and 1990s, it formed a special enterprise zone, kind of a free trade zone in the province of Fujian. Fujian is the part of mainland China opposite Taiwan. In the 1980s and 1990s, Taiwan was an enormously successful part of the global economy, but it was a high-wage economy. It was also a technologically rich part of the global economy. Fujian, part of China next to Taiwan, was a low-wage part of the global economy and a well-educated, had a large surplus of well-educated labour. The relations between the two, in other words, were complementary. Taiwan spent much of the next 20 or 30 years offshoring low labour-intensive manufacturing to Fujian, providing the technology, and Fujian was able to utilise the global marketing networks of Taiwanese corporations in order to export to the global economy. The relations between the two, in other words, were complementary. If, however, we think about the relations between China and Pakistan, the CPEC links up with that far western area of China, the province of Xinjiang. Xinjiang is, as you can see from this, is a very lightly populated part of China. It doesn't offer the potential for a large market or a large labour force. It has a population of some 22 million people, only about 10% of Pakistan's population. It also is of relatively low income. GDP per capita in that part of China it's about 75% of the all China average, about a third of those in eastern China on the coast. Also, the main exports from Xinjiang are things like fruit and textiles, exactly the same things that are being produced in Pakistan. So the relationships looks much more competitive than it does complementary. And also, if one looks at the Chinese economy has huge excess capacity in steel, in cement, some of the key industries in Pakistan. The Chinese government wish to use, one of the aspirations of the Chinese government is to spread industrialization westwards within China towards those western provinces. So if those western provinces are industrializing, producing more steel, producing more cement, and already producing fruit and textiles, i.e. exactly those industries that are key to Pakistan's economy. So the relationship looks more competitive than it does complementary. So the first of those claims by the government of Pakistan we may question. Second of those claims is whether there will be mutual benefits between Pakistan and China. So transport makes markets more efficient. People and goods can be transported more quickly and more cost effectively. But what is an efficient market? The question, efficient to do what? An efficient transport network might make it easier for Chinese goods to be imported into Pakistan. For example, improved transport in Italy in the 1960s and 70s led to the bankruptcy of much of industry in southern Italy because they could import goods from North Italy more easily. More better transport could just lead to Pakistan being used as a transit link, so goods from China being exported through Pakistan and then from Pakistan exported to the rest of the world. It could be that CPEC makes it easier for Pakistani firms to start up, to grow and to export to China and the rest of the world. So transport makes markets more efficient, but efficient to do what? And that might be good or it might be bad for Pakistan. Now, studies of Pakistan show that infrastructure is quite often not significant or not the most important constraint on the ability of new firms to be established or existing firms to grow. There are many other very significant constraints on manufacturing growth that will not be tackled by CPEC, such as the very poor quality of education in Pakistan, the very low level of credit, of bank credit available to manufacturing firms, the very poor level of governance in Pakistan, political instability, the ability of manufacturing firms to acquire new land, and that has been identified as a very significant problem by the Chinese government. I mean, if we look at what has happened to imports and exports from Pakistan and China over the last 10 or so years, we can see there has been a surge in exports from China to Pakistan. The argument that this excess capacity in China, the hyper-competitive manufacturing, the desire to industrialize West China has seemed to have benefited China, more exports to Pakistan. And we look at what has happened to exports from Pakistan to China. They've stagnated or even declined in the last few years. So clearly something other than energy and transport links is hindering the ability of Pakistani firms to export to China. If we look at where infrastructure has had big benefits, where it has promoted manufacturing, when we look at history, we can consider Germany in the 1840s, Japan in the 1960s, China in the 1980s and 1990s, examples of where infrastructure has fueled industrial growth. A common denominator in all of those experiences is that governments have used industrial policy to make sure that infrastructure leads to domestic industrialization, that infrastructure generates linkages within the domestic economy, and that those linkages don't leak out and benefit other countries. So Germany in the 1840s, 1850s, for example, built railways, but also put tariffs on the imports of industrial goods, invested heavily in engineering education, designed a banking system that funneled long-term credit towards industry. So utilised an industrial policy to ensure that the benefits of infrastructure benefited or generated benefits for domestic industry. If we look at contemporary Pakistan has no clear vision to use industrial policy to promote domestic industry. It has some promises of tax credits to promote investment in manufacturing, but Pakistan has a long record of failing to be able to promote domestic manufacturing. Pakistan is not committed to an industrial policy. It is very clearly committed to free trade. The Chinese government are absolutely explicit. CPEC and the rest of the Silk Road is premised on the idea of free trade, not industrial policy. Long-term credit to industry has been declining in recent years in Pakistan, and Pakistan is just about to sign an agreement with the IMF, which is certainly likely to revolve around expenditure cuts, investment cuts, to close Pakistan's budget deficit. And my final point of evaluation here is on prosperity. Is CPEC likely to have a big impact on Pakistan? I don't know if you can see that this is some historical examples of big infrastructure projects. These are big railway projects in history. You can look at this. CPEC is actually very small by historical standards, less than 2,000 kilometres of railways. And you look at these absolutely enormous railway projects that have been built in other countries in relatively short periods of time. So CPEC is small by historical standards. Some more examples here. CPEC, less than 1,000 kilometres of railway, road building, and you look at some of the other huge road building projects. So CPEC is small by historical standards. The infrastructure investment in CPEC is likely to run, as I said, 25% of the total, so likely to run to around about $10 or $12 billion over 10 years, so amounting to about $1 billion per year. At its peak, CPEC is likely to comprise about 6% of national investment in Pakistan. It's quite marginal. I mean, compare that $1 billion a year, or $10 or $12 billion of infrastructure in total, to the $70 billion that India has invested in a relatively short period of time in recent years in what is known as the Golden Quadrilateral. It's a big highway project to connect up the four major urban areas of Pakistan. Or one can look at, in 2018, China is planning to spend $112 billion on its railway system, and that's actually a reduction from the previous year. So these are small numbers by comparison. This is a small amount of money. Now, one of the history shows us one of the big important factors of infrastructure projects is its transformation of domestic markets. If we look at 19th century railways, for example, in all of those historical case studies, they were transformative. Transport before railways had been based on using waterways. It had been based on using bullocks or pack animals. Transport had often been seasonal because of freezing weather conditions or monsoon conditions in India. Long-distance trade could only occur during particular times of years. Railways transformed that. Before railways in India, over a distance of about 100 kilometres, prices could differ of grain or rice, key necessities, could differ by a factor of 3 or 4-fold. The construction of the railways in the 19th century transformed infrastructure. Goods and people could travel 600 kilometres a day. They could travel all year round. Now, the impact of that has been found in price differentials. So historical studies of prices show that the construction of roads and railways brought dramatic declines in price differentials. So prices in different parts of South Asia or Russia or South America became much closer together. Price differentials disappeared with the coming of the railways. So roads were transformative. Are railways, new railways and roads in Pakistan likely to be transformative? There's no evidence that this will be the case. Between 2001 and 2011 in Pakistan, for example, so this is before CPEC, studies of price differentials in Pakistan showed very little price differentials in different parts of Pakistan. There's looking at lots of commodities across lots of different urban and rural areas in Pakistan, i.e. even before CPEC, markets in Pakistan were relatively efficient. There's little scope for railways or roads to have a dramatic impact. So in conclusion, I am probably sounding a little pessimistic here. Here's two historical studies of dramatic transformative infrastructure change. On the left there, India in the mid-19th century. Many scholars have argued the construction of the railways led to the destruction of much of India's domestic industry because they facilitated the import of textiles from the UK. So railways were transformative in a negative way, deindustrialization. And there on the right is one of the huge steel works in Germany. The contrary argument, railways were transformative because they stimulated domestic industrialization and created what today is still one of the world's leading industrial economies. So I may sound pessimistic here. I suggested that CPEC is not going to lead to complementary links between China and Pakistan. It's more likely to lead to imports from China. That it's probably going to have little impact on prosperity, and perhaps even impact for Pakistan is going to be negative. But I'd like to qualify that. I am cautiously optimistic about CPEC. I think the energy investment is crucial. I think the expansion of Gwadar is important. The alternative port of Karachi has reached its limits. The US and the IMF have been very bad at funding infrastructure in Pakistan. Their approach has been too short-term for the long-term requirements of infrastructure, and China does have a clearly demonstrated long-term commitment to infrastructure around the world. I'd rather think the fact that I don't think CPEC will have a transformative impact is because I'm more realistic about Pakistan. Pakistan is not like Laos. Now, in Chinese investment in Laos, it's huge relative to the size of the Laotian economy. Chinese investment in the Central Asian republics, those landlocked areas of Central Asia, today dependent on the export of raw materials, again could have a transformative impact. But we look at Pakistan. Pakistan is all but a middle-income country. At independence, 99% of Pakistan's exports were raw materials and agricultural products. Today, maybe 90% of Pakistan's exports are manufactured goods. Pakistan is actually one of the forgotten relative success stories of the global economy. China's GDP has grown on average by 5% a year since independence, that's 70 years. According to World Bank data, Pakistan has not had a recession, a year of negative economic growth, since at least 1960. So Pakistan's economy is too big, too relatively successful, too industrialized for CPEC, $1 billion a year, to have anything but a marginal impact. I believe CPEC probably will have an impact, but we're not talking here, I would suggest, about a new East India company. The East India company dominated, maybe transformed South Asia's economy over decades or centuries. CPEC, by contrast, is likely to have probably a positive but much more marginal impact.